the recruiter from 2001. In the summer of 2001, a guy joined us on a 3-month contract. At first, he bragged about having Microsoft certifications, but after a few days, we realized he didn't even know how to use a mouse or understand how scroll bars worked. They assigned him a simple task: visit websites and measure how long each page took to load. The problem was that he had never used a browser before. We had to explain that too, and he was completely blown away by the concept. To this day, we still don't understand how an adult in 2001 could not know what a browser was. However, he very quickly figured out how to search for porn, and instead of testing websites, he started spending his time watching it. Naturally, the computers immediately got flooded with pop-ups and viruses. We kept catching him doing it, and every time he denied everything. Then he started doing the same thing on other computers in the lab. The guy had absolutely no self-control. His excuses sounded like something a child would say, that the lab was already infected, that it had always been like that someone else had done it. You've got a pop-up from a porn site on your screen. Someone else opened it before me. Who? That hairy guy with a beard in the lab? There was no hairy guy with a beard in the lab. I was extremely happy when his contract finally ended. Peanuts, TV shows, and live wires. At a construction site, we once had a guy show up for work with nothing in his tool belt except a small bag of peanut. Nothing else. Needless to say, he didn't last long. I also had a coworker who worked as a school counselor. She was supposed to rotate between 5 schools. She would regularly call the school where she was scheduled to be and say she was heading to another one because of an urgent situation. One day at lunch, she was enthusiastically talking about what was happening in her favorite TV show. The principal happened to be sitting with us. At one point, he stood up, smiled, and said, "Stop by my office after lunch." Turns out that for months, she had only been meeting with a few students a week. And once I literally yanked an intern's hand away just as he was about to grab a live power cable with his bare hands. He insisted it would be fine because he would only touch one wire. The senior electrician politely asked me to get that intern out of his sight before he turned himself into charcoal. As punishment, I made the intern spend 3 days in a row watching workplace safety training videos. Culinary disasters. This wasn't a coworker but a classmate from my culinary program. We were making sugar sculptures out of isomalt. Our instructor carefully explained the process step by step and told us that after we cooled the pieces, he would show us how to properly use the torch. The student sharing my workstation decided he could figure it out on his own. He turned on the torch, set his piece down on a surface covered with plastic wrap, and started literally torching everything around him. I yelled at him to stop, but he snapped back that he knew what he was doing. A few seconds later, the plastic wrap burst into flames. We scrambled for the fire blanket. The instructor managed to put the fire out, but honestly, it scared all of us half to death. In my introductory cooking class, there was also a guy who somehow managed to set pans on fire on a regular basis. On exam day, we had to cook burgers. Of course, he cranked the burner to maximum, splashed some oil into the pan, and then got distracted for a moment, at which point everything ignited. The room was quiet, and suddenly we heard a soft "oh." He had grabbed the scorching hot handle. Then he tried to smother the pan with a dry towel, which instantly caught fire in his hands. The chef instructor silently walked over, put out the towel, covered the pan with a lid, and simply said, "Get out." And one more thing, I once saw the same guy get angry and throw his rented laptop down the hallway. As the device slid across the floor, he suddenly yelled, "Oh no!" Fertilizer, hallways, and a gin and tonic. I've got a mile-long list of the ridiculous things our completely incompetent project manager did, but the best one was when he insisted that a $3,000 shipment of fertilizer had to be delivered exactly on schedule, even though the supplier warned that heavy rain was expected that day. A couple of hours later, the entire pile was simply washed away. One coworker once told me she got lost while trying to escort someone to the accessible exit. The route there is literally a straight hallway with no doors along the sides. I still have no idea how you could possibly get lost there. I also had to teach her how to make a gin and tonic 9 times. After the 9th time, she still made it wrong. At that point, I just gave up. I also worked with a guy who managed to mow the greens at the entire golf club without a blade installed on the mower. Sticky notes and Dropbox. My coworker was generally pretty capable, but she had to write down detailed instructions for anything she didn't do regularly. The The problem was that she was incredibly disorganized. One time, I was called over to help her again. I explained the whole process, and she wrote everything down on a sticky note. She needed somewhere to stick it, but every wall and her monitor were already completely covered with notes. She finally found one free spot on the monitor, peeled off the sticky note that was already there, and realized it contained the exact same instructions I had given her the last time. I wouldn't say this next guy was incompetent, but his introduction to our company was memorable. On his very first day, our new hire somehow managed to delete our entire production folder in Dropbox, about 25 terabytes of video, designs, and other working files. After that, we spent 2 very stressful weeks restoring everything through Dropbox support. And yes, the new guy was extremely embarrassed. But honestly, if a new employee, especially on their first day, has the ability and permissions to delete that much production data, that's 100% the company's fault. That kind of disaster was bound to happen sooner or later. It was just waiting for its moment. It's just unfortunate that this particular newbie had to be the one it happened to. A genius at finding answers. This happened back in school, but the level of incompetence was so impressive that it's worth sharing here too. One guy tried to use the teacher's computer to find the answers to our upcoming test, and he did it right in the middle of class. It was a science lesson. The teacher had a separate storage room for materials where her laptop was kept. While she was teaching, he slipped in there. What he didn't realize was that the computer was connected to the classroom projector. So the whole class, along with the teacher, watched on the big screen as this genius went to work. He literally opened File Explorer and typed the word test into the search bar, hoping to find the answers. Office mistakes, the calendar, and Excel. One of my employees missed a 9:00 a.m. meeting. When I asked why, he said, "You said the meeting was at 12:00, not 9:00. I was completely confused. The notification clearly said 9:00, and the whole team knew the meeting was at 9:00. He sent me a screenshot of his calendar. It turned out his entire calendar was set to the wrong time zone. This isn't exactly a mistake, but once I watched the head accountant and the only accountant in our small company enter 2 numbers into Excel, then pull out a calculator, add the numbers on the calculator, and manually type the answer into a 3rd cell. It turned out she had been working like that for years, and the spreadsheets had about 1,000 rows. I showed her how to use formulas and copy them down the column, but a couple of months later, I saw her doing everything the old way again. The security guard and the tie. I was in charge of a security team at a construction site on the coast where we had to run 24-hour patrols. I handled the day shift, and a friend of mine managed the night shift. The construction crew was doing dredging work, and we had to keep 2 guards posted along the shoreline to make sure random people didn't wander into the work zone. Picture a square section of beach with a guard standing at each corner. One night, one of our guards couldn't be found, and his phone kept going straight to voicemail. It turned out that around 2:00 a.m., he had set up a folding chair on the sand and fallen asleep at his post. About an hour later, the rising tide rolled in and completely soaked him. His phone and everything in his pockets were ruined, and he just walked home, dripping wet, without telling anyone what had happened. I don't think he was even punished. He was probably embarrassed enough already. Later on, though, he did get fired after he drove a company a TV off a sand berm and got it stuck. The story of Bozo, the toothless Serb. What's the dumbest mistake your incompetent coworker ever made? I used to work for a landscaping and cleaning company. We had this one 60-year-old toothless Serb who had fled the Civil War and barely spoke any English. The owners felt sorry for him because he looked a little pitiful and was clearly trying to support his family. At the same time, he was constantly doing strange and frankly stupid things. For starters, one of the workers put a fake owl on the roof as a decoration. This guy, let's call him Bozo, was convinced for the longest time that the owl was real and believed it had cursed the entire property. I tried explaining to him that it was just plastic, but every time we walked past it, he would still flinch. One day I noticed pieces of the owl scattered all over the grounds and saw our boss chewing the Serb out for bringing a hunting rifle to work. There was also the incident with the ride-on-floor scrubbing machine. It has to be cleaned regularly, otherwise dirt builds up inside, and instead of cleaning the floor, it just spreads the grime around, leaving dark streaks everywhere. Not surprisingly, Bozo never cleaned it. While I was mowing the lawn, he was using it inside and managed to turn a slightly dusty floor into a full-on muddy mess. One of the owners saw it on the security cameras and stormed out of the office, stomping and yelling at him. "If this isn't cleaned up by tomorrow, don't even think about coming back to work." And finally, the wife of another owner felt sorry for Bozo and decided to do a good deed. She went through her husband's closet and gave Bozo a few of his old suits and jackets so he'd look decent at church and events. But Bozo started wearing those suits to work. Remember, he was a janitor and landscaper. One day I come in and he's riding the lawnmower in an old tweed jacket. The owner walks up to me and says, "Hey, I think that's my old jacket." As far as I know, he still works there to this day.